Jemima's videoing the presentations this evening, and as you can tell, she's very professional. And so am I. But can we start now then?
Yeah, it's rolling now.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along this evening to our talk entitled Turing's Legacy. We've got some great speakers for you tonight. I've got a couple of announcements to make, which is that the next BCS London meeting will be on the 16th of February, and the title of that is Subjects Are Not Objects, Enterprise Modelling Using Projective Analysis. So that's here, 16th of February, and Bernie Cohen from City University is the speaker. So please sign up for that. Also, a book coming out soon, which you might be interested in, as you'll hear, Alan Turing and His Contemporaries, Building the World's First Computers. So I'm looking forward to reading that. That's by Simon Lavington, who's an absolute expert in this area. So looking forward to that coming out in, I think, March. Is that right? Oh, fully disappeared. Okay, it's coming out soon anyway, so we'll Google it. I'll just quickly say a word about my kind of connection with Alan Turing. I've got a degree in computer science, but I don't think I actually had heard of or was taught about Alan Turing as part of that. I think I really found out about him when I went up to Bletchley Park a few years ago, and after the meeting that I went to there, I went for a walk around and found John Harper and his team in the middle of rebuilding the bomb machine. And I saw the half-built bomb, and it just looked like the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in my life. I don't know if you've seen it, but I highly recommend a trip to Bletchley Park to see it. It's now finished, so that was probably about 7 years ago. And I think Peter, someone's got a slide of it here, I think it's Peter, has got a slide of it in his presentation, so you'll be able to have a look at it tonight if you've not seen it before. After that, my next kind of Turing-related incident was, I think, I'm sure you all signed the petition, which was on the government website in, I think, 2009, asking for an apology from the government to Alan Turing for the way he was treated. So I was actually at a party the night before it was announced that Gordon Brown was going to make the apology, and foolishly at midnight, after having drunk quite a few bottles of beer, agreed to go on breakfast time the next morning. Any better now? Oh, no.
We'll start again for the video.
Perhaps we'll just have an edited highlights this evening for the video. Yes, so there was I, after about probably 8 or 10 bottles of beer, out at Tweston, it was actually, which is a Twitter party, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I got a call about midnight asking me to go on breakfast time the next morning because Gordon Brown was going to apologise. You know, the petition had worked. And so I won't tell you the whole story now because I'm being videoed and it's embarrassing. But I did manage to get in a car at 4:30 that morning, having had 3 hours sleep, and was reasonably coherent on breakfast time that morning. So that was quite a stressful occasion. The next time was, of course, with the Turing papers, and the Turing papers were up for auction about 15 months ago now, and Julian's going to talk about that in more detail in a moment. But I was, as you may know, I've been campaigning to save Bletchley Park, which is now saved, for the last 4 years. And as part of that, whenever I went to a talk, if I saw somebody that I thought might be able to help Bletchley Park in any way, I would always take an opportunity to go and speak to somebody and ask them for help. And at an event at Nesta, Megan Smith, who was Vice President of Google, gave a talk, and I thought, well, she'd be a good person to talk to. So I approached her at the end of the meeting and asked her to help, and both her and Simon Meacham and other people at Google managed to raise £100,000 from Google over a weekend, basically, to help Bletchley Park buy the Turing papers. So that's in another involvement that I've had with my notes. Right, so the last thing I wanted to say was, as Rob pointed out to me earlier, there's another petition now to get a pardon for Alan Turing, which maybe we can put the link up at the end. But if you Google Alan Turing and pardon, you'll be able to find it. And I hope that everyone here will sign the petition. I think it's about 20,000 signatures on the petition now, but we need to get 100,000 for it to be debated in the House. So please sign the petition and ask other people to do the same. Okay, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our three speakers. First speaker tonight is Peter Bentley, who works at UCL. He's written several computer science books and is one of those people that is ridiculously intelligent. And so, yeah, no pressure at all, Peter. But he's just scarily intelligent. But he can also talk about things at an everyday, about different things at an everyday level. And he's an excellent speaker. So Peter's going to be talking about Turing's legacy in terms of computer science. Then after that, we have Julian Wilson, who looks after the Turing papers at Christie's and works at Christie's. And he's going to be talking about, that's why I didn't say you're really intelligent. I just brought these people to insult them. They were my friends, but after tonight I'm sure they won't be. Julian is also ridiculously intelligent. And, they're all great people, they're all very clever. And Julian works at Christie's and handles Turing papers, so he's going to be talking about Turing's legacy through his artefacts. And Sarah Windmill, who's also ridiculously intelligent, and is director of IS at UCL, and is an all-round wonderful person who, every time I talk to her, inspires me to be a better person. So, with no further ado, because me wittering on enough, Peter, over to you.
It was a bit of a big ask from Sue to So Turing is kind of regarded as the father of computer science, and this is the British Computer Science Society, British Computer Society, and so it's a bit of a big ask from Sue for me to, in 20 minutes, say some of the things that Turing did. I mean, really, we could be discussing Turing's achievements for a couple of weeks without repeating ourselves. I also suspect that many of you may have heard of Turing, and you may be aware of many of his contributions to the field of computing. So my apologies, this out of necessity has to be a bit of a brief summary, a bit of an overview. I think we might have a discussion later if you want to have any questions. What I decided to do was kind of think about Turing as a person and what he achieved throughout his lifetime. I'm going to gloss over his childhood. And let's pick him up when he's 22. So, Turing at age 22 managed something quite impressive. He was at Cambridge and he proves the central limit theorem, which I won't go into what that is. Basically, if you know a little bit about statistics, you know the normal distribution is a pretty common thing. He proved why you get a normal distribution in statistics. So there's a little explanation there if you want to read it. It was a really nice achievement for a 22-year-old, but someone had already done it. And this was actually to be a running theme with Turing. The way Turing thought was actually described by a colleague of his. I've just lost my microphone. what he thought was actually summarised by a colleague many years later. Turing liked to solve the problems himself. He didn't like to read what other people had done first. So even if he set a problem in computing or mathematics to someone else, before he looked at their answer, he'd work out his own answer. So this caused some frustration with his colleagues, but they understood actually it gave him his real originality, his creativity. In fact, Turing kind of felt that if he read other people's work, it would lessen his creativity somehow. And there's a quote that apparently Beethoven made. He was asked had he ever heard of the recent work by Mozart, and he said, "I have not, and neither shall I do so lest I forfeit some of my own originality." So it's the same kind of idea that creative people have. Somehow if you hear what someone else has done for the same problem, you feel like you might not be able to think of your own idea. So Turing did this throughout his life. He was always interested in coming up with his own ideas, his own thoughts. So a couple of years later is when the big thing happened. He became interested in some quite deep mathematical problems, and in particular a challenge set by a mathematician called David Hilbert. Now David Hilbert has set a lot of well-known challenges. This particular one, which was called I'm going to mispronounce this, so anyone who knows German, I apologise. Thank you. Which means basically decision problem, for those of us who speak English. And what this means is, if we summarise a little bit, is the challenge was, is there a general method or procedure that, given a language and given a statement in a language, can tell you whether that statement is true or false? So any particular mathematical language you like, any particular statement you like, is there some kind of general method or procedure that will automatically tell you whether that statement is true or not in that language? So Turing wanted to figure out whether there was such a thing. He wanted to figure out, was there some automatic way of solving these things? And actually Turing thought the answer was no. But he had to prove it. So to prove it, he came up with this thing. This is not some decoration, this is actually some artist's impression of his machine. This is a kind of thought experiment, if you like. And today we call it the Turing machine. It was using the ideas of the time when storage of data on tape was the norm. So he imagined, let's have a machine that could potentially do any possible calculation, any possible kind of computation. It would store its data on a strip of paper tape, and that's what you're seeing here. And potentially, it could read numbers, ones and noughts, from this paper tape. It could shift this paper tape back and forth, and maybe when it read a number, that could correspond to an instruction. That instruction might mean spool left a certain amount, spool right a certain amount, write a different number, read a different number. And he proved that through these simple mechanisms in this imaginary machine, you could do any possible computation. So how could he use this theoretical machine to answer this challenge? Is there a procedure that would tell you if something is true or false? Well, he thought this machine could do any possible computation, so if he could prove this machine would sometimes get stuck, then he could show this statement was false. It's not possible to do any possible, to determine the truth or falsehood of any statement in a given language. So the way he did it was to think about whether this machine would get stuck in an endless loop, which, if you think about it, could quite possibly happen. If this thing has read an instruction that says spool to the left 3, and then read another instruction from that point that says spool to the right 3, then it'll constantly be spooling the tape back and forwards forever. It'll never stop. So he imagined, can you tell if this machine will get stuck in an endless loop or not? Well, is there an automatic way of telling if this machine will get get stuck in this loop or not. If there is an automatic way, well, his machine should be able to do it, because his machine can compute anything. So he imagines a second machine that looks at the first. The second machine will stop and output. The first one is not going to stop if it's in an endless loop. Or the second machine will run forever if the first machine will stop. And now the clever bit, what happens if the second machine looks at itself? Suddenly, if it stops, it runs forever. If it runs forever, it stops. It's a paradox. It can't happen. And so through that argument, he showed that there are some kinds of computation that are basically uncomputable. Okay? Because this theoretical machine could compute anything, but it can't compute some things because it gets stuck in an endless loop. So he's proven some things are uncomputable, which means he's shown with this original challenge it can't be done. It can't be done. And this has a lot of implications. This means, for example, our programs, our software, will always have bugs in them, because there are some things that we can't compute. And some of those things are clever software that can automatically debug your code. Okay? We'll never have an automatic program that will stop your software having bugs in it. We're kind of doomed in that respect. So, as ever, Turing had come up with this amazing challenge, the answer to this amazing challenge, and just as he was publishing it, he read another paper. It's a paper by someone called Church, an American, and guess what? This guy had just beaten him to it. He'd used a different approach. He'd invented something called lambda calculus, which we still also use today in computer science. But he'd proven that the same challenge was not possible. He'd just beaten Turing to it. Luckily, the timing was so close that the two decided to collaborate, and indeed Turing went to Princeton and completed his PhD with Church. And today, because of this work, we have the Church-Turing thesis. Poor Turing didn't quite get only his name on it, although to some English people they like to drop the Church off. But internationally we tend to call it the Church-Turing thesis. Everything algorithmically computable is computable by a Turing machine. Okay? So this concept of a Turing machine is still in use today. Even though it may seem like a very bizarre little idea, this tape spooling thing, it's theoretically a computer. Okay? It's the same computer, it's compatible with every other computer that we've got here. His theoretical computer could run Microsoft Word, it could run any other software. It will take a long time to do it, but theoretically it could do it. And it's this theory that we really call Turing the father of computer science, because he invented the concept, the theoretical concept of a computer. But he didn't stop there. So after this success, he was approached by the government. And I suspect we're going to hear a little bit more about this. But he was invited to Bletchley Park because the war was on and the Germans were sending a lot of encrypted messages, and it was extremely important that we decrypted these messages. Turing was now known as a very good mathematician. This was still before we really had any physical computers. There were some very basic kinds of computers, but no one had quite connected Turing's machine with the physical, primitive computers that were still under construction. But Turing decided the best way to crack these codes was actually to build a machine. And so he did, and it was called the bomb, and this is indeed a photo of it. So very quickly they were able to crack all the German Enigma messages from the Luftwaffe, and shortly afterwards they were able to crack the messages from the German Navy as well. Now the Germans upgraded their encryption methods, but it was still Turing's ideas that were extremely useful in cracking the future encrypted messages. And indeed, in the field of computer encryption, some of Turing's work is still extremely valid today. The sad thing about this work, of course, was it was top secret. So Turing his work was completely unknown, and even while he continued with it, and since then he's had a lot of credit for this work. At the time, nobody knew he was doing this work at all. It was, in terms of mathematics, it was extremely impressive too. It's claimed that Winston Churchill said Turing's work was the greatest single contribution to victory in the Second World War. I don't know if he actually said that or not, but people like to say that. And if it's true, if that work shortened the war by 2 years, you know, that's tens of millions of people whose lives have been saved through that work. So after the war, he carried on. He went to Manchester, and he also worked with NPL, and he designed a very fancy real computer following his theory. He called it the ACE. In fact, his designs were way too complicated. They couldn't build it. They had to make sort of prototype simplified versions, much to his frustration. And there were certain arguments between Turing and, I've forgotten the guy's name, the guy at Morris Wilks, I think it is. Morris Wilks, who I think was the founder of the BCS as well, wasn't he? Yes. So there were certain arguments between Morris and Turing, because Morris was a very practical engineer who built the first practical stored program computer at Cambridge. Turing kind of sometimes insulted Morris a bit, saying, well, Morris's methods are more in the school of thought of the Americans. It's more in terms of engineering than thought. But Turing had the vision in terms of how computers should be, and in those days they couldn't make them quite as good. He also believed many other things. He was a member of the Ratio Club, and this was a British kind of cybernetic society that looked at early artificial intelligence and issues to do with what would it be like if computers in the future were as clever as us. Now, you have to remember this was at the time when there were very few working computers in the world, and those computers were probably the size of this room here, and this high as well. So to actually consider that computers might one day be as clever as us was an amazing leap of faith. Not only did he consider it, he even invented a test. How could you ever tell if a computer was as clever as a human being? Today we call this the Turing test. And if any of you have seen Blade Runner, when they test the robots in Blade Runner, that piece of the movie is actually very much based on the Turing test. The true Turing test works like this. You have 3 rooms. So you're in one room and you're typing. You're having like a chat room session. You're chatting with the individuals in the other 2 rooms. One of these individuals who you're chatting with is a human being. The other individual is a computer. You don't know which is which. So the test is, after 5 minutes of this text-based chatting, if you can't tell the difference between a computer and a human, if you can't correctly identify which is a human and which is a computer, then the computer has passed the Turing test. The computer is as clever as a person. Now, he made some predictions that he thought we would definitely be able to do this. In the paper where he describes this Turing test, he makes these predictions. I believe that in about 50 years' time, it will be possible to play the imitation games, he called it, so well that an average interrogator will not have more than a 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes. I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will not be able to speak of machines without machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. So he was very optimistic. It's more than 50 years, and of course the end of the century has now passed. Computers can't pass the Turing test yet. Okay? There's plenty of people who've tried, but we can always tell. And do we commonly speak of computers thinking? I'm not sure we do. So we're getting there, but he was perhaps more optimistic than we did. In fact, I know of one example where somebody did claim that their software did pass the Turing test. They'd set up an automatic chat room piece of software that responded to anybody who happened to log on and chat to it. And the way it worked was it just threw a lot of really nasty insults and swear words and really, really mean things that we say back to whoever was chatting to it, and somebody was fooled. Somebody had a very long, detailed argument with this piece of software and called it a psycho, called it all sorts of names, but actually thought it was a human being. They thought it was a crazy human being, but they thought it was a human being. So you kind of can pass the Turing test if you twist it in that way, but in a general sense, we can't do it. Not yet, anyway. Maybe I wish I had t-shirts like this. I kind of like this t-shirt. It says, I failed the Turing test with a person underneath it. Maybe this is more of an indication of our school system than but maybe this will become valid sooner. So Turing went on and did many other pieces of work before he died. I won't go into how he died, but towards the end he was investigating many different areas, including even biology. He looked at morphogenesis. What you're seeing here is an actual animation using the Turing equations of reaction diffusion that one of my PhD students did a few years ago. He believed that patterns in nature, things like the stripes on a zebra or the spots on a leopard, could actually be caused by chemicals reacting and diffusing together according to certain equations. And he formulated those equations to show how such patterns could emerge. It was a good guess. We now know in morphogenesis, and this is actually one of the areas of research that I do, in terms of modelling, I should say, I'm not a biologist, he was close, but he wasn't quite right. Okay. Chemicals don't freely interact in the body, but they kind of do in terms of cells passing messages. So he's kind of right in some respects. I think I'm running out of time. So I'm going to draw this to an end. There are many, many other extremely important contributions that Turing has made to computing and computer science. I think we rightly call him the father of computer science because he was the first really to conceptualize what a computer is. And we still use him in all the theories of computer science. We still use his theories today. We still use his concept of the Turing machine today. And indeed in AI, we still talk about the Turing test today. I like this picture of Turing. This is him getting off the bus in the corner. You can see him a bit more clearly here. The trouble with all the pictures of Turing that you see is he's combed his hair and he's neatened himself up with the pictures. Actually, Turing was a scruff. Okay? Had a bit of string to hold his trousers up. He was generally certainly a genius, not a neat genius. Okay? He was a character, he was an unusual, a quirky guy, quite a high-pitched voice. But by all accounts, we wouldn't have computers today, we wouldn't have the theory of computers today without it. So, yes, I write books. Brief advert. If you want to know more about Turing and also other pioneers, people like Shannon von Neumann, Maurice Wilkes, and others, I've got a book coming out too. It's called Digitized. It'll be out at the end of March. And on that note, I shall pass it back